Hello, everyone. It is so great to be with you. Good afternoon, howdy. So, if you are tuning in from Texas, from College Station, or any other place around the country or the globe, please say howdy right there in the chat and tell us where you are tuning in from. I am Dr. Mariana Garriazzo, and I welcome all of you to Reyes Talks, Interdisciplinary Virtual Colloquium Series at Texas A&M University. It's such a great joy for me, this special panel. This is our first panel for Reyes Talks. And when we began conceptualizing the programming for this series, we wanted to create a space to bring together powerful and courageous voices, change makers. And I am very pleased to tell you that the first people that I really thought about who could be impactful and really exemplify these change makers and social changers are the people joining us today that you will be introduced. Hey everyone, howdy. It's great to have all of you here. So let me tell you a little bit about Reyes Talks. Reyes Talks is made possible by an Advanced Climate Together grant funded by the College of Liberal Arts. This is a collaborative project among 6 university units, including Africana Studies, the Dance Program, the Film Studies, Latino and Mexican American Studies, Performance Studies, and Religious Studies. I am so grateful to the staff in Performance Studies that helped to coordinate the behind-the-scenes documents and paperwork and everything that needs to happen for this event to happen. So my gratitude extends to Myra, Darlene, and Kathy for all their assistance on putting this together. We are nearing the end of this phenomenal series. We had several events this semester, and there are 2 more events coming up next Thursday on April 15 and the last panel on April 22nd. So please join us for those 2 events. I'm going to copy and paste here the link where you can register for events. Of course, these are open and free to the public, so invite your friends to come. Now, students can earn points, maroon-based points, to attend this event. I'm going to also copy and paste that information right there on the chat. And these are points that you can use to check in and win prizes. So make sure that you don't miss that opportunity. To all joining us on this talk, I invite you to truly demonstrate the Aggie spirit that sets this community apart. Our core values of excellence, integrity, leadership, and respect inform all of our events at Reyes Talks. And everyone in attendance is expected to demonstrate these core values during the talk. Quoting Dr. Annie McGowan, Interim Vice President and Associate Provost for Diversity, it is the shared responsibility of all of us to embrace and support individuals from a wide range of identities, perspectives, viewpoints, and experiences with full understanding and sensitivity, to promote a safe and inclusive Aggie community. We encourage you to report acts of hatred, discrimination, or bias towards a member of the Aggie community using Stop Hate. The Office for Diversity also provides resources and self-care tips for addressing xenophobia and racism. I'm going to copy and paste also that information on the chat here for you to have that resource available. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about how we conduct these talks. Typically, we ask people to remain on mute to ensure the best quality of sound. This is our first panel, so we will have the panelists respond spontaneously to some questions that my colleague Corey Lefevers will be moderating throughout the event. At the end, I will be posting a link for a survey. This survey is anonymous and completely voluntary for everyone that is in attendance who would like to participate in that survey. This is just for the grant impact that we need to include in the report. Now, this panel is titled BIPOC, standing for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, Leadership and Representation in the Arts and Humanities. And I'm going to invite my colleague, Corey. Hi, Corey, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing very well.
Dr. Lefevers. Corey will be moderating the panel and introducing each one of these speakers. So it's so great to have you. Thank you so much, Corey, for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Dr. Corey Lefevers, lecturer here in the Performance Studies Department at Texas A&M, and my research focuses on music and performance, racial formations, and anti-racist pedagogy. And it is just an honor. I'm very grateful to be able to participate and moderate this panel and introduce our guests. So I'll begin with a little bit of framework for what we're hoping to get to today, and then I'll introduce everyone. So all too often, minority groups feel as if they are fighting on their own, in isolation, or simply against institutionalized racism and bias. In this panel, BIPOC Leadership and Representation in the Arts and Humanities, we will bring forward issues of accountability and equitable presence to create the conditions for robust recruitment, inclusion, and retention efforts. We hope to ignite critical discussions about the role of our work as artists, scholars, and administrators to advance social justice and a more inclusive and just society for marginalized groups. And I will introduce our panelists now, and feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself when I say hi to us when I introduce you so we know who we are. First, we'll introduce Prudence McDaniel, cellist, educator, transformative, and exponential life coach. Prudence McDaniel is the founder and CEO of PM Creative Life Coaching and Consulting, which provides mentoring, entrepreneurial, and financial coaching services to performers, visual artists, educators, and creative entrepreneurs. Prudence has performed with the award-winning Marian Anderson String Quartet for 18 years of the quartet's their 31-year history, and held academic positions at Blinn College, Texas A&M University, Prairie View A&M University, and Temple College. Prudence held principal and section positions with the River Cities Symphony Orchestra, West Virginia Symphony Orchestra, and the Columbus Symphony Orchestra, and with the Houston Symphony, the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, while participating in the Minority Orchestral Fellowship Program. Welcome, Prudence.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We also have Gabriela Lena Frank, currently serves as composer in residence with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Included in the Washington Post's list of the 35 most significant women composers in history, Gabriela is the subject of several scholarly books, including the Norton Anthology, The Musics of Latin America, Women of Influence in Contemporary Music, 9 American Composers from Scarecrow Press, and In Her Own Words from University of Illinois Press. Winner of a Latin Grammy and nominated for Grammys as both composer and pianist, Gabriela also holds a Guggenheim Fellowship and a USA Artist Fellowship given each year to 50 of the country's finest artists. She is committed to civic outreach in rural public schools in California and a climate activist co-authoring a regular column on climate for Chamber Music America magazine. Welcome, Gabriela.
Thank you for having me. It's a real honor.
We also have joining us Caen Thomason-Redus, who became the director of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra's Senior Director of Community and Learning in 2015, after performing for 2 years in the Detroit Symphony Orchestra as their minority fellow and coaching the orchestra's civic youth ensembles. Previously, he was director of corporate partnership for the Sphinx organization and held various academic positions at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and the University of Evansville, Indiana. In addition to his career as an art administrator, Caen enjoys a high artistic profile in teaching, performing, and recording. Welcome to you, Caen.
Thank you, guys. I'm big fans of Gabriela and Prudence and Mariana, so thank you all. It's a pleasure to meet the rest of you.
And we also have joining us today, Yosimar Reyes is a nationally acclaimed poet and public speaker. Born in Guerrero, Mexico, and raised in Eastside San Jose, California, Reyes explores the themes of migration and sexuality in his work. The Advocate named Reyes one of the 13 LGBT Latinos changing the world, and Remezcla included Reyes on their list of 10 up-and-coming Latinx poets you need to know. Reyes was featured in the documentary Second Verse, The Rebirth of Poetry. He is a Lambda Literary Fellow, as well as the recipient of the Undocu-Poets Fellowship. Reyes previously served as artist in residence at the media and culture organization Define American. Welcome to you, Yosimar.
Hola, buenas tardes. Super excited to be here and to share with all of you.
We are so thrilled to have all of you. And as Mariana had mentioned, I'm going to ask some questions and just chime in and feed off of each other, and we'll see how many questions we can get through. So I'll start with this one. Each one of you have created and currently lead projects that support social justice, social advocacy, civic outreach, community, or personal empowerment. Tell us about a project you lead or have led that was impactful for either you or marginalized communities that you serve. So just throw that one out there, and I know all of you could respond, but
Okay, I will start. The work that I do was inspired by a conversation with one of my former students who went on to get her degree in music education. And I knew that she was going to be teaching in the public schools. So I asked her, as a private teacher of over 30 years, what did they teach you in music business? And she said, well, they taught us basically the stuff they always teach, which is to figure out how much you want to charge, and then, find out what the going rate is and write up your policies. And that was it. And I began to do a little bit more research and started to discover a lot of things I didn't know after I sat down actually with my accountant, asking her how many people did she have that were in music that she talked to like they were business owners, and what information would she give to business owners that she never gave to musicians. And so that was how I got into the entrepreneurial coaching, because I discovered that after canvassing and asking several accountants if they ever treated their musicians like business people, it was pretty much no. And so that's a part of what I do, is I go around the country to speak with the college students about having an entrepreneurial mindset, especially if they're performance majors, because they're going to teach, but they're running businesses. And I just came from giving a workshop and some presentations in Florida at both Stetson University and Bethune-Cookman just about 3 weeks ago. And in the presentations that I gave, in speaking with the students afterwards, something new emerged that is very relevant to today's conversation, which was that when I asked them how they were feeling as the next generation of educators that were going to be setting policies in the face of all the things that are going on today, how did they feel, how well equipped did they feel to step into their roles as educational leaders? And it was almost unanimous when so many of them said, I don't feel like I've been equipped at all. I've just spent 4 years of my life getting trained, and now I'm walking out into the world, and I walk into a classroom and I just feel stuck. So that began a discussion about pedagogical teachings, the policies surrounding education. There's just so much going on. And the biggest, most important thing that they said to me was that they didn't feel that there was a safe space in which to discuss all these different issues that are happening in society right now. And so that has become a new part of what I'm going to be focusing on, is to, as an educator, to find a way to create some sort of a think tank or an institute in which these young professional educators in the arts are able to come together and discuss the issues of race and racial equality, and just find a place where they can actually step into their power as the people who are going to be leading society through this evolution that we're just beginning.
Yeah. Buenas tardes a todos. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Yosimar. I think for context, for me, it's very important to kind of really acknowledge the moment that we're at right now, right? I think it's very important to recognize that this week we are all witnessing a trial that should not be taking this long to convict. I think that we are coming out of a pandemic that has taught us to evaluate where we stand as a community and society. The Black Lives Matter movement has taught us the fact that citizenship in this country does not necessarily mean that you be treated like a human being in this country. We just got out of presidency that normalized hate. We're seeing the rise of anti-Asian hate in our communities. And I think it's very easy for us to get lost in that despair and that kind of, everything that we're facing, and it's not normal. And I think it's very important, and I acknowledge everybody that's here, but it's also very important for us to, take breaks from that, because it's not normal that we become desensitized to all this structural violence that we're witnessing. My name is Yosimar Reyes. I happen to be a DACA beneficiary, DACA Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, an executive order signed by Obama in 2012 that grants me the legal authorization for work for 2 years. Every 2 years, I pay the government $495, and they grant me this thing. I am what people will call a dreamer, even though I don't use that term because I'm 32 years old now, and I've been waiting for this legislation to pass that hasn't. I write a lot about undocumented immigrants simply because there is a lot of myths around who we are, what we do, or where we come from. And it's very important to recognize that had I not been racialized as a Mexican or as a brown person in this country, my pathway to legalization would have been a little bit easier. And so for me, one of the important projects that I'm doing in my work is that, when we started telling narratives around documented people 20 years ago, we started in 2001. The idea was that we needed to convince the movable middle, right? This idea that we need to, the people that didn't know where they stand, right? But at this point, we reached the point that if you don't know where you stand, you cannot be neutral in a moving train, as Howard Zinn said. I realized that was a lot of energy that I was expelling that wasn't good. Toni Morrison told us that racism is a distraction. It keeps you from doing the work that you need to do. There will always be one more thing to justify. So since then, I stopped. I realized that if you're somebody that believes in caging children, separating families, or you believe that I'm inferior to you because I don't have a social security number, there's nothing I can do for you. You got to go to therapy. Xenophobia is a disease that you need to confront with a therapist, because I'm not equipped for that. So I started building poems to build the confidence of immigrants. So now I just do poems that are fun, and I make jokes about my situation, because I think right now in this moment of despair, what's also very important, and the work that, all of you all are doing in this panel, is to do joy, right? How do we talk about joy, celebration? And I think that's the beautiful thing about being in this panel with such distinguished artists, is that you guys are creating bodies of work that give our communities a break, a moment for us to reflect, and give us that kind of, a moment to be at peace with one another. So I think right now that's the thing that I'm more focused on. How do I talk about joy and celebration and allow our communities to, feel a little bit of love? So that's what I'm currently working on. So yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
I'll jump in, and I just need to say I've already fallen really hard for you, Prudence and Yosimar. This is one of the best things about these kinds of arranged marriages when you're just thrown on a panel with people and you suddenly get a snapshot of what they do. And Yosimar, you're in California. We're going to need to hang out once this pandemic eases. I'm already asking you out. Like Yosimar, I grew up in the Bay Area. I was a bit more north up in Berkeley. And I was born partially deaf as well. And so there's a lot of intersections of identity. And sometimes there's a sort of victory by dissection. Do you pick yourself as a woman or the person of color or the disabled person? Because that's how the world is looking at you, that they have these sort of channels that they put you in, and it never addresses this holistic package that is each and every human being. So I entered classical music because I had a very unusual route in Berkeley. My primary piano teacher was a refugee from South Africa. And she was the only one that would take me in as a student before I had my hearing aids, and didn't think I was backwards. I mean, I was surrounded early on in my life by former Peace Corps volunteers like my father. I mean, when you look at Kamala Harris's upbringing, that was my upbringing. Very, very similar. She went to school just blocks from where my brother did, and they're almost contemporary. So I really relate to being the daughter of immigrants and surrounded by artists and intellectuals, and being kind of poor, but genteel poor, without a lot of the traumas that sometimes goes along with that. Back when Berkeley was cheap, it's still trippy for me to walk around, and that's like, that's $1 million home, that's a $2 million home. It's very strange for me. So I got into classical music totally blissfully ignorant about its long history of being very classist and really championing only a certain kind of musician. And Caen and I first met when we were teenagers, because we were both in the same prep division, a summer program at the San Francisco
Like 30 years ago,
Conservatory.
Gabby.
I know, it was 1988, 1989 when I did that. And I was scholastically a high achiever. My father went on to become a Mark Twain scholar at Berkeley. And so my brother and I have an older brother who's the first Latino to graduate from Stanford with a doctorate in neuroscience. I mean, it's kind of gross, the kind of things that we were pushed to do when we were younger. But my father, a white man, was really frightened for his children. And he's a World War II baby, with family that came through these horrible times in the 40s and in Eastern Europe. And he was worried because I was partially deaf and a woman. So he was my first white ally. And I had a great model for what to expect. And I somehow instinctively knew, as I went through classical music training, which white allies to kind of move towards. I couldn't even articulate what the criteria was. It was just a feeling like, would my father approve, or would a quality person like these Peace Corps volunteers approve? It was that simple and basic. And something I tell emerging musicians now is trust your instincts. You have a lot of wisdom in there. You really do. You've been nothing but a professional student or a professional youngster all your life, but you've got an old soul in you that you've got to try to drown out the noise. People telling you, what does a proper Mexican look like? What does a proper Jew look like? And try to drown that out and listen to these absolute rules of humanitarianism that you carry. So I would qualify it now looking back as an extreme experience through 11 years until I got my doctorate. Real highs, like these amazing lifelines and mentors, and some lows. And the lows were things like my first day of the conservatory training. I was mistaken for the cleaning staff. I was asked to leave the practice room because I looked like one of the Mexican maids. I was 17 years old. I was thrilled to be in the school. I was playing with Val. And I remember thinking, when that piano professor was yelling at me to leave, that what if I were a Mexican maid, and touching this piano? I mean, and that was an instinct that came up. I didn't have to intellectualize that kind of outrage. And so I left the conservatory at Michigan with a doctorate in hand. I had already begun traveling in Peru, where my mom's from. And this was at a time when everybody was going to Vienna or going to Paris. All my peers were studying classical music, and nobody's going to Peru for classical music. So I mean, there were a lot of things I was already doing. I was volunteering at a men's prison in grad school that was mostly, had big populations of Latino men. And I kept that really secret because I thought many of my teachers would not take me seriously if I wasn't just all about getting on the new music gig circuit and doing this competition and going to New York City. And But something in me, persisted. And then I had a couple lucky breaks. I got signed on by a really huge, venerated publishing company and manager. And it was a woman-dominated firm at that time in the early 2000s, women that started families later. And I was a shot out of the dark. The way they talk about it now, it's like these models that you find in Africa that had never seen Vogue. And then all of a sudden their career happens. It was kind of like that. I had no idea. I had no aspirations of being an orchestral composer or anything like that, because I automatically assumed that was closed to me. I did. I did not participate. I was trying to figure out what my life would be as a composer. So the opposite happened, over the years, and a lot of doors opened, and it was, you have to grow very quickly. And for many years, I was focused on being an exceptional and often singular voice of color, a woman of color in this industry. And it took every bit out of me. So from time to time, I would be able to do something that was of civic value, I would say, and be able to influence some youngsters coming up. But it was so hit or miss that in 2016, what finally led me to a considered consistent effort at social justice beyond the lane that I was swimming in with my own career was my husband and I were taking a cross-country trip. And this was during the election, I think, when all of us were like going, I can't believe how divisive, how awful, really that's acceptable. We had no idea what was coming over the next 4 years. But I was going to a gig in New Mexico, and at a truck stop, I was just getting candy and water, and I was knocked down from behind by this big, large white guy, and it was completely unexpected. I fell and I dropped everything, and I looked up, and he was standing over me, and he was really pumped. He was really happy, and he laughed, and he pulled back his shirt to show me that he was carrying. It was an open carry state. I was so stunned. I didn't even recognize that I was in danger. My brain just wasn't processing. And I got up, and he was kind of laughing, and I just turned away. I was shaking, but I did not want to show it at all. But it was instinct, just act like nothing happened. And I remember bringing up my stuff to the cashier, another big white guy. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? My white guy, my husband was outside watching the dogs. I was like, what? I was trying to figure out what to do. And he leaned across, and he had seen the whole thing, and he just said, are you okay, miss? And it was like going from one extreme to the other. Somebody that was showing me a breath of allyship, and somebody that was showing me his capacity for extreme violence. And something changed. And I realized, you know what? I've come to this point of privilege. I'm a complicated mix of privilege and disadvantage. And it's time for me to really do something now. I'm almost 50 years old. I have a lot of support around me. I have some financial means, and I started my own Academy of Music. And the first donor, small donor I talked to, before, when this was just an idea, she was asking me what I was going to call it. And I'm in Mendocino County, so I was thinking Mendocino Lab or Safe Music Space, or really, really bad name. And I remember her head was just like, I just kind of ran out of gas. Well, I don't know. And she said, you got to put your name on it. Women don't name things after themselves. And I was thinking, okay, no, it's just so immodest. I said, you know what, she's right. So I put my name on it. This is the Gabriela Lena Frank Creative Academy of Music. We're a nonprofit. We incorporated in 2017. We rose quickly. We got the attention of the industry. We're now seen as an influential voice. And it's just only been 3.5, 4 years. We have a small budget. I've yet to draw a paycheck. It's not about that. It's about helping all of these composers. And you can look us up. You'll see that it's the safe space that I would have liked when that piano teacher was looking at me and saying I was cleaning staff. I want to create that and put diversity in the word diversity. So that's my main thing. I try to give them that. We do community work in this tiny town with Yosimar, and many people like you that are babies. They're like a quarter, of our age and experience, but they're dreamers. And I continue this pretty substantial career that I have alongside everything else. I'm very honored to be here.
Okay, I have to follow that, which is ridiculous. But so I am Caen again, Detroit. For me, there's kind of like, well, I'll I'm going to skip a whole part of my answer I was thinking about. I'm going to cut to the chase. The things that we're doing at the Detroit Symphony Orchestra that I'm most proud of are actually the things that we're just beginning to do now, and that's because of the way that we're doing them. I'll tell you, we've done educational concerts for 90 years. We've had training ensembles for 50 years. There's all of this legacy we have that we're proud of and I honor. But right now we're changing the way we do a lot of our work. And so we've got 3 examples. We've got something called Detroit Harmony. We've got something called the Detroit Neighborhood Initiative. And we've got a new little baby program called Senza. And Senza, yes, means without what? Without limitation. So it's going to be, it is, right now we're in development mode. We're like in pilot phase. It's a high level kind of conservatory style training for students in our civic youth ensembles, students who are from underrepresented communities. And rather than saying, here is the constellation of opportunities we are providing for you because this is what you need to be in a symphony orchestra or whatever, we're saying we're going to put every resource of the DSO at your disposal, and let's sit down with you, 8th grader, and help you figure out, discuss with you what you would like your future to be. Now, you may not know exactly what that is as an 8th grader, so we're just going to start that conversation, and we're going to get you every experience, whether that's private lessons with our orchestra musicians, being in our large ensembles, being in our small ensembles, having master classes, having direct mentoring from various people on staff or in the orchestra or on the board even, who knows, people that are doing things at a high level that interest you. And we're going to stick with them all the way through high school and see if they launch into the career that they want to and go to the college that they want to and have the kind of training that fits them. And it's the kind of thing that is super high intensity on resource. You know, we're talking about many people focused on the wishes and aspirations of a handful of 8th graders. So it's not the kind of numbers and scale of impact that often entice a lot of people or a lot of support. But, you know, if we're serious about changing the way music functions in people's lives and the way it includes or excludes people, you know, we can't just put new names on things or bring new people into existing programs or swap out a few teachers. It's got to be a change in approach. And that's something that we're deeply embedding in that very small program right now. It's also something that we're doing in those bigger programs I mentioned with the neighborhood initiative. It's very common for an orchestra to seek to engage with a particular community, whether that's geographic or some other demographic, and you know, show up with something that we're just are sure is what you want. And that usually has limited impact, if not negative impact. So rather than just do that again, we're doing a pretty long, like 6-month process of listening and having community conversations with partners. So first starting at like an organizational partner level and then getting to their partners within the community. We've already done about 28 of these conversations with people in 2 specific neighborhoods, all leading up to some activity that we'll do this summer that will be co-created. So here was another instance where we're not defining the outcome, we're just defining the pathway and the process. And I'll tell you, that's not always the easiest thing to pitch to funders. Sometimes they like specifics, they like outcomes, they like deliverables. And we're essentially asking for trust that the deliverables are going to be exactly what they should be because they are decided by the people they're supposed to engage. So it's an important thing for us to do, and we're doing that. So I'm very proud of that change in process for us. I'll say we don't always have huge resources at our disposal. And so sometimes the question is just like, well, you know, I need to do something now. I need to respond. I want to do something well. And for me, that part comes out like in my own flute playing. And, you know, my resources as a flutist are very different than my resources as a Detroit Symphony administrator. And so then it comes down to the choices I am able to make. So for instance, whose music I play is very, very important to me and has been important to me for a long, long time. So, as long as I can remember, I haven't been okay with just the normal canon of composers. I've always sought to perform as many kinds of composers as possible. I've always really enjoyed working with composers on compositions, and I've two of Gabby's pieces that I love. One's a concerto, one's a flute and piano piece. I've played them a bunch of times, and every single time people love them and are blown away by them. And A, it's because it's good music, and B, it's because it comes from somebody they didn't expect. People are getting used to it, so I get less of that now. But especially early on, it's like, wow, that's a great piece, and they're like surprised. I'm like, come on, there's great stuff out there. So we make choices all the time in what we do at whatever level we do it, and every choice is a chance to include some amazing new or existing talent, or long ago people from hundreds of years past that were overlooked then and should not be overlooked anymore. We always have choices to make, and it's more interesting to find some new creativity there.
Thank you all. I mean, this is just so amazing, and so much we could still keep talking about. So where to go next? I think especially leading off of some of the things that Caen just said, there's a nice segue into another question that's going to allow us to touch on multiple issues, including this idea of mentorship as well, which so many of you have mentioned as well in your opening explanations. So, but I think the question I want to ask now has to do with the importance of representation. Right? Why is representation important? Why does it matter? And how is that at work? And how does it have a positive impact? So there's a little of a framing to this question. So nothing about us without us is a slogan used to communicate the idea that no policy should be decided by any representative without the full and direct participation of members of the groups affected by that policy. This can involve ethnic, racial, ability, gender, sexual orientation, or other groups that are often thought to be marginalized from political, social, and economic opportunities. Some propose that the principle of nothing about us without us should take center stage on how historically marginalized groups represent themselves in all settings. Why is this concept of representation important? What are some of the ways in which BIPOC and diversity presence has a positive impact on organizations?
I'm going to go first so that I don't have to follow you all. I'll keep it a little bit brief. There's two really important things in my own experience. I'll speak mostly rather than an expert. I'll just tell you what I've experienced. One is that, first of all, it's just more interesting and you get better outcomes when you have more kinds of people around. Because for every label or division or category you could think of, when you have too many of the same people, you just don't have as good a result. The creativity is just simply stifled. Like it's just a fact. I've seen it so many times. And the thing is, we all have our own sphere that we're aware of, and we don't know beyond that. And if you're all in the same sphere, like, you're just missing out on most of the things. So from just simply the creativity standpoint, you get better work when you have more kinds of people involved. There's also a business aspect to that, if you're an organization that has to fund itself, like, you need buy-in from a lot of people. And so you want to be speaking to as many people as possible. Now, I'll say, just on the practical side, this is a sad fact, but representation, even though it is completely inadequate, is absolutely essential, because I just cannot count the number of conversations where I've been, either the only or one of very few minorities of any kind, and I've been the one that's had to point out something that seems just blatantly obvious to me as either ineffective or unproductive or flat out racist or misguided, and it was just news to everybody else. And there's so many times where it seems like it shouldn't be, but it just is. And I also know, just, from conversation with other people, that conversations that do not have any kind of diversity in it, things just get left said and just left out there. I was had a colleague in a university conversation where they're talking about, should their department really recognize Martin Luther King Day? Because they're like, well, the students, they're just out partying anyway. It's like completely missing the point. is that really what faculty need to spend their time on? Like, first, it's just, that's a horrible use of staff time. Like, don't waste your time with that. But second of all, I would guess that if there were a Black person in the room, they wouldn't be saying that. That's not nearly good enough. That's literally putting a Band-Aid on it. That's saying, okay, well, this one stupid, tragic thing is not going to happen. There's the whole underlying issue of why they would even think that in the first place. But bottom line, a person who's in a position of power is going to make a different decision because of who's in that room. And they're going to state a different opinion. And that has a ripple effect. So even though it's inadequate, it's not nearly enough. A lot of things start with representation, because being there when the decision is made really, really matters. At every level, whatever you're doing, being there when the decision made matters.
I think I would just add just one small thing about that, which is, so often when the benefit of the doubt is given to a well-intended new program to make a connection with a fill in the blank minority constituency, and it's done without the input of somebody who knows that group by membership or having invested a good deal of heart and time working with this group, is that the conversation involves, for instance, say with a music organization, not changing the repertoire that they're actually putting out there, just educating the community how to understand them better. And the expectation to make you more of a savvy classical music audience so that we don't have to learn new skills and perspectives, is how to grow a future ticket buying audience for an orchestra or a chamber music society. And it's very scary for musicians often to pick up new skills of improvising, which is really big in non-Western cultures, or to play, quote, out of tune, which is really big in my mom's culture. We don't call it out of tune, we call it nuance, and it's just, there's a lot of things that are stacked against actually asking somebody to listen to the input of somebody belonging to a community, because it takes so much work. You have to step up and learn skills in a field that penalizes you for missing a little bit, playing something a little bit out of tune, or just missing one beat. So I think it's important to change the content, and that can only come from somebody who represents that field. Now, this also requires nuance. You can't just get to, I've seen this a lot, where an orchestra, maybe a pops orchestra, will play some Brazilian music or mariachi music, and it's so heavy-handed, doesn't have the same kind of lift. And it's the one event a year that they have for a Latino audience. Yeah, Latinos will come, but they won't like flock to the doors. I mean, it's and then the music is not played knowledgeably well, and doesn't have the kind of nuance that a true band embedded in the culture will. So it's not just getting somebody to the table, it's getting somebody to the table consistently. It takes time and kind of a trust that has to be earned. I think community groups especially, they're savvy. They know here comes the orchestra again with another photo op that they need. They know these things. And it has sometimes been really awkward for me when I've been composing in residence at really esteemed orchestras. And they're like, oh, thank God she's brown. Let's just drop her in. And so they'll just drop me into Syrian communities and African-American communities, and anybody with a speck of brown in them. Suddenly I'm going to be that bridge. If I'm a guest, I don't know. And I feel like, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to try and make a connection with you one-on-one, and try not to represent this strange kind of saviorship that can happen. And it's too bad sometimes, because there are good intentions. I really see that. I see a lot of times there are really good intentions, but the investment is so scary that that's what needs to happen.
I wonder if there's not a preference for chiming in next. I wonder if Yosimar might weigh in a bit here, because Caen was mentioning things being left unsaid if there wasn't representation in a room. And then Gabriela just came off with this, there's good intentions, but, in your introduction, you sort of also pointed out that you're sort of done trying to move the middle. And that's their own psychological problem they need to sort out. It's not your role to fix their racism and such. So I wonder if you could weigh in on this idea of sort of how they've weighed in on that topic. Did I make myself?
Thankfully, I think we're, I'm a nerd, I'm an English major, I love books, and, and even then, when I went to college to pursue my English degree, a lot of people told me, like, that's such a white department, what are you going to be doing? And I'm like, oftentimes it's very hard for me to be in that department because I felt like that character in Freedom Writers or Dangerous Minds, there's always like that archetype of the hood kid that wants to write himself out the hood. So basically that was me. But I knew that I had something, that a lot of people don't have, right? Which was voice. I might not have institutional power. I might not come from money. I might not come from that background, but I did have culture. And in this country, as we are unraveling and we're calling out, cultural appropriation, and we're calling all these things, the root of the problem is that poor people, people of color, indigenous people, Black people are the original creators of culture. And then the problem is that we do not become the ones that are the benefactors of all of that, right? We're seeing all this through the internet, through TikTok, to everything that's happening right now, as Black artists do not, get the same caliber of respect for being originators. And Shinoa Achebe says, right, until the lions have their own historians, the victory will always glorify the hunter. And I think for me, what's more important for our communities is how do we build our confidence when we've been told that everything we do is not up to par, it's not scale, it's not sufficient, right? That imposter syndrome that as artists in these kind of fields, navigating institutions that tell us, this is not of caliber, this is not. But the fact is, for me, a lot of people told me that my writing might not have been as, I know that I don't write in a certain type of way, but I realized that my significance and my voice is for my community. And that's when I started to decide that, right? If I only write poems for undocumented people, of course, art is universal. If you're in this, the universal is in the specific, right? It becomes open to a lot of communities. So I realized that if I center undocumented people in my writing, and if I say that it's for undocumented people, of course it's going to be universal, because anybody can identify with longing, with love, with hunger, with fear. Anybody knows those human emotions. But I also know that there's 11 million undocumented people in this country. If they're the only people consuming my work, I'm going to be fine. So I think it's, for me, the significance of that representation is audience, knowing who I'm creating this body of work for and who needs it and who's hungry for it. And I think for me, that's where I'm at right now with that. And of course, I think a lot representation in general. A lot of people don't think of undocumented people as artists. People don't think that we're creating bodies of work. People think that we're so immobilized by fear that we can articulate our own situation, which is kind of paternalistic in a way, because I meet a lot of people that want to hug me just because I don't have papers, which is cute. I'll hug them back. But I am not like a Sarah McLachlan animal cruelty commercial, right? Like, I am my own person with my own agency that has joy, that's messy, that makes mistakes, that I'm not a perfect dreamer, I'm not a perfect immigrant. But I think for me, like, that's the importance of representation. How do we allow people of color? How do we allow artists to be three-dimensional beings and not this kind of textbook answer of, whatever your biases might be? So yeah, that's where I'm at.
I wanted to speak not just to the importance of representation, because boy, do I have stories, but one of the things that really struck me was in teaching music appreciation. And when we started to see, and on social media back in 2009, where people began to really talk about cultural appropriation. I've always loved history, and so I started to dig a little bit. And I'm also a very intuitive learner, so sometimes I get flashes. I'll read something and then I get a big flash and I go, oh, wow, okay, another thing got tied together. And one day I was standing in front of the class and I was talking about Antonin Dvorak and how he was brought to America to teach American composers to create the American sound. And after I grew up in Iowa, born and raised in Iowa, and the community of Spillville was a Czechoslovakian community that came over to take advantage of the land grants that were being given to keep the Sioux Nation off of lands they'd been pushed off of. And so Dvorak and his family got invited out, and he got introduced to the sounds through meeting Harry T. Burley. And then he also, that summer that he went to Iowa, got introduced to the music of Native America. And so then when he went back to New York, there was an article that was written in the newspaper, and in it he was quoted as saying that in order to create the sound of America, you had to access the sounds of the music of the slaves and the Native Americans. And so when we wonder about where cultural appropriation comes from, especially in music, boom, there it is. Because everybody came over here people were coming from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and bringing their music with them. And so it was all sounding like Western European-based music. And so creating a new sound, as Caen, you were talking about representation and the influences of other. It's so important to understand where this comes from. And so, Yosimar, thank you for what you just said as well, that, it's really an amazing thing that we think that we're going to be able to appreciate what everybody's culture has provided if we don't ever acknowledge. And understanding what people have provided, it makes a huge difference. So, I'm also thinking about the whole thing of canceling and shutting down voices that we don't agree with. And I just feel like conversation is much, much, much more effective to bring us forward and move us into our ability to be able to evolve, where we can be more supportive of each other. We can find new ideas and expand our creativity in our solutions. So everybody has to represent.
Thank you for that. And does anyone want to chime in on cancel culture? I'm going a bit off script there, but this idea of canceling, I was like, oh, can we talk about that for a bit too? And any other, I mean, I don't want to just keep reading from a list. This seems like such a vibrant sort of conversation, but maybe we could move a little bit off of script here with this idea of sort of addressing this through conversation, and representation matters. So how do we put this into work that might impact and create some more sustainable sorts of changes with the work that you're doing with the organizations, right? So many of you have talked about mentors as well, but how do we take these ideas of representation and put them at work to create conversations that can also then, something I think Hannah also mentioned, just it doesn't work to, move out a few people, right? Or maybe change one piece here and there, but like, how do we re-articulate all of this? And so, how can we ignite that sort of sustainable change through representation? It matters. Okay, what do we do with it? How do we do it? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that just because somebody shares your same ethnic background does not necessarily mean that inherently they believe in the same ideals as you, right? And we witness this with, you know, Cadence Owens and all these things that get propelled in these kind of talking heads, right? And just because somebody it looks like you does not necessarily mean that's representation within itself. In terms of you know, because we're so vast and our experiences are so big. And I think what's interesting in this moment that we're living right now, because it's a social media moment, TikTok has kind of taken over kind of the way that we communicate. We're communicating through virtually, right? And even now that we're all communicating in this way, right, you get glimpses of people's lives that are actually very curated in what you post and all that. So I think for me, it's I try to lead with the way of assume best intentions, and until, you know, and also realizing that there's a difference between intention and impact, and how you say things can have a different impact. You know, one of the things, you know, I am always quoting authors. I feel like I'm that librarian that's always quoting books. But Maya Angelou told us that words are things, right? Words are things. They get into your body, they get into your hair, they get into our upholstery. They are things. So that's why it's very important to be aware of the words that we speak, and especially make opinions and assumptions about communities that we are not a part of. I know that when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening and taking precedence in our country, a lot of our media was focused on the looting, that we neglected the fact of that a broken window can be replaced, but a life can't, right? And so for me as an immigrant, it was very sad to watch other undocumented people, other Latinos, claim that Black people were just these kind of violent beings that were taken to the streets, and that in ourselves, in our community, showcase our own anti-Blackness as Black folk, as Latinos, that we did not understand this, right? So for me, it was very important to also be compassionate in my understanding with my own family members, to like, listen, you're teachers, you're all professors, and you know that in order to be a teacher and a professor, there needs to be compassionate, because you don't win out of shaming somebody, you don't win out of calling somebody out of their name, right? If you love somebody so much, you love them because you're going to teach them something that they might not know. And so I think for me, that's more the significance of these conversations, right? That it starts at our dinner table. You have family members, you have grandmas, you have moms, you have dads that love you profoundly, but because they have not been exposed, or because they've been conditioned to fear the other, that they might not understand our communities. And I understand that, right? I've done speeches in areas where, you know, old white ladies want to hug me and they tell me like, oh, you're one of the good ones, not knowing what that implies, but because I know, that I assume they mean well. I'm like, okay, I accept that, because that's what, not that everybody should do that, because, you need to measure your own capacity to do that. But I think it's very important for me, for my own, the four agreements. That's what I practice. So, because I need my own peace. I can't fight every battle and I have to choose. So I think within that context, I think when speaking about cancel culture is that, right? Also us understanding that I don't know everything, I'm gonna mess up, but I hope that you know my heart and know that I'm trying to do something good.
Yeah, I just want to add a quick point to what Yosimar just said. I think the danger of like inadequate partial representation is that um, that that really good ability that people have to tokenize and just exceptionalize whomever, whatever that is. Um, you're one of those articulate ones, or you're one of those high performing ones, or well, you're different, or you're not really, or you're, whatever it is. And there's so many times where either individuals or organizations seem, um, I guess, content, just like achieving that lowest level of representation. It's like, well, we had one, they were included, and there's so many obvious problems with that. There's that's one perspective when there should be many, and then you're allowing for everyone involved to feel like, well, that one person or that one group or what, just kind of like ends up, simultaneously being allowed to stand in for everybody else that you're attributing to that group, but at the same time you are often considering that individual as an exception to that other group. So you've both taken away the voice of the group and still take, like, you're not giving credit to the group for the accomplishment of the individual. It's a negative on both sides, and all this happens like in the background. This is usually, I think, this can happen completely in the background. Some people may think it very consciously, but a lot of well-meaning people, this all just happens through their hardwiring. Just the way they see the world, this happens. And so by the time it makes it to their actual conscience, it's already been filtered. It's already worked into them so that they don't question it. They don't think of it as an assumption. They don't realize that they're saying, oh, well, this person I respect because they seem to be able to articulate themselves well, but I still don't respect the group that they represent. Like, most people, I want to think, are not thinking that way, and it's on the subconscious level. So what to do about it, like the representation, it has to be broad and it has to be meaningful. Like it's never good enough to have one or two. It has to be many more, and there has to be, it's another way that representation is inadequate is that it has to involve the decision making and the sharing of resources. If the power and the resources are not being shared, meaning, like, if you're gonna seek to engage with a group and you want to engage that group in deciding what's happening, they really need authorship. That you need to be comfortable giving up your veto right to how decisions are going to be made and how dollars are going to be spent. And that is incredibly difficult for people, and especially organizations, to do. We want to hold tight to the things that we consider most critical. And so I think each of us in our own roles, we have to think, what are the decisions that we're making? What are the opportunities we have? And how can we distribute that power or that resource to more people and truly give up some authorship of it? It's very uncomfortable, but it's something that just has to happen so much more.
Caen, I had a question for you. Being in an administrative role the way you are, how do you work with your board on getting them to recognize these biases that are underlying biases that are controlling them? Is it all just through diversity, equity, and inclusion training, or do you have some sort of a coaching program available for the board of directors that allows them to work with a personal development coach? Or, I mean, if they're going to be the people who are mentoring these up and coming young people, I'm just wondering how deeply and broad spectrum has the thought of these programs actually gone in terms of changing mindset overall?
Yeah, thank you. I'll quickly answer that question. First of all, from the program side, from that Senza program and mentors, the program is designed so that anybody who's going to be involved in mentorship will have training, and it'll be ongoing training through the life of the program. So that's how we're dealing with it on the programmatic side. On the board side, I'll say I've worked with a lot of boards, and as boards go, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra board is a very good one. I'm happy to say that. Of course, there's still plenty of issues, and we do have training that's going on. We do have a whole diversity, equity, inclusion strategic plan that's happening, consultants and training, all that kind of stuff, and the board is part of that. So that's a really good thing. I mean, the real, I'll take that one step further though. For any organization, especially nonprofits that rely on the support of usually a relatively small number of community members, it's not like donors go through diversity training, and that and sometimes there are strings attached to dollars that can be difficult. So there's a lot of broad recognition that needs to happen with how capital has been established, how capital is flowing, and what responsibility comes with that privilege of having that capital in the first place. No matter how you have earned your money at this moment, you have earned it in a system that took it away from some people and subjected people to horrific things. So that doesn't make you a bad person, but it means you have the responsibility to handle those dollars appropriately, and that is the kind of awareness that we need across the board, that is further than just like, do our board members have the right perspective? Because for any nonprofit, the board, yes, is important, but end of the day, the dollars can do a lot of speaking if there's not the dollars do a lot of speaking no matter what, so you want them saying the right thing.
I mean, I think building off of that, I wonder if other folks could chime in on experiences and successful tactics that they've used to navigate those situations where there might be certain stereotypical expectations of their work, or dealing with promoters, or expectations that we need a Latino program. So how do you navigate that and introduce a broader range of representation, particularly when you're dealing with structures that are expecting certain things for their money, or want to see these sort of urban youth uprising to teach the Mozart type outlooks to save them somehow with Mozart? I mean, how are you navigating those? What's been successful? What's been difficult? If some folks could chime in on that, I think would be an interesting way to kind of build on that last question.
I'll jump in, and I'll say that this conversation I have with many of my composers that come through my academy are about them saying yes to things that they don't really want to say yes to, but because they're in a place of scarcity and they need the work, whether to build up a portfolio, to build up their presence in this field, or to make a little bit of money, that they'll say things, they'll say yes to gigs that make them a little uneasy, whether it's because there's a lot of the involvement of fossil fuel, or the representation of their personhood. And I can talk about stories like, well, yeah, I said no to this orchestra saying, I'm not going to be on your Valentine's Day Latino lovers concert. It's just, there's so many things like that. I've been on a concert before, and for Les de Latinas. And I was like, oh my God, and it was supposed to be something that was celebratory and like warm and fuzzy. And so I'm in a position now where I can say it's just simply, no, I'm not going to do this, and I don't want my music played on that. But it's important then for me not to simply say no, but then to say, but this is what we could do. Would you consider this and this? And I come from that generation, my formative years being in the 80s and 90s. I didn't even know it was a choice to not be exhausted, that it was my job to educate. It was, so when I hear my younger generation, it's been really transformative for me to see what has changed and what hasn't between their experiences and mine. The things they call microaggressions, I just called insults. And that's what I was calling all my life. I didn't realize there was like, oh, wow, you guys are so smart. I was born in the wrong generation. And they're telling me it's not my job. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. It's not your job. But could it be? A little bit. You have a teachable moment here. I mean, what's your exhaustion level? And I would talk about my life, and I didn't realize this was, a thing. So really the economic peril that a lot of my artists feel drive them to make decisions they're not always comfortable with. And so one of the things that we started doing at my academy, and my academy is tiny, really, really small, is that rather than just be a pass-through experience, so they get a 1-year apprenticeship with us, and we work with them, and we get performance mentors. They realize a piece of music. We just walk them through the whole experience. But now we have alums, and that I want this to be a lifetime affiliation where we also get them paying work. I basically leverage my connections. I have connections to these big organizations. I'm working with Philadelphia Orchestra right now, and they commissioned 3 of my composers and program another one. And that's just to start with, is to try and get them some I guess a foothold or a standing into this industry on their own terms, and so that they can then not feel like they have to compromise their ethics. They feel like they're making some money, and that's a very big part now of what we do. I would say equal to the pedagogical first experience that each one of my composers come to. So things you can do, you can try and say no, you can be a little bit exhausted and engage in that conversation. And be ready to be diplomatic, even when you just want to go, ugh, like this, but just breathe. Try to be diplomatic and be ready to walk away. Be ready to, have standards and walk away. I think you feel less crazy for doing these kinds of things if you have peers that are also trying to figure out, and we normalize having these conversations of how to do it. And that's an important part of our academy. We create these sort of reunions with our alums so they can talk with one another. And my staff, my tiny staff, some of our former composers have come through, are very dedicated. We get to know all of them. And one thing I'll be very open with my composers too is about the money that I have taken. Once I was really becoming cognizant of where some of it was coming from, I had people that wanted to join my board that promised a lot of dollars, and I just didn't feel good about them. I said, no, we have a tiny, 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 tiny board. We have a tiny budget. It could be 2-3 times what it is if I was willing to compromise some things and engage in certain kinds of activities that were not, I guess, horrible, but we're so rife with peril. I just did not think that I should take that step at this time. So there are strategies, and it can depend on what your protections are, what your platform is, what your status is, where you are in your life. And those of us that have careers of substance, I think, can do more, and we should. That's the responsibility of privilege. I was talking about how I feel like I have that now. It's not an entitlement. You have to earn it day in, day out. And one of the things you can do is say no.
Thinking from like an organizational aspect, like it's so I something in my mind right now I'm particularly curious about is the backgrounds that our attendees are from and what their possible careers are going to be. So since I don't know, I'll just throw out some things there. But obviously, like if you're getting an invitation to participate in a program that's already baked and you don't feel good about it, if you can say no, you should say no, because don't be a part of that. I also recognize that some people don't feel they're at a place in their life where they can say no to a gig, and I personally try very hard not to judge people by the label that's been applied to them. So I wouldn't judge somebody who was in one of those horrible concerts that Gabriela just described, but the people I would judge would be whoever decided the title. That gets to the organizational side of it. If you whether your organization is a recital series that you are creating, or an orchestra, or a university, or a presenter, somebody is thinking about the marketing of it, and maybe it's a one-person shop, and so that somebody is you. And so then just think very carefully about how you can tell the right story. Often there's somebody else who's thinking about marketing, and you got to help them think about what is the story you're trying to tell. The people that are trying to sell tickets to what we call classical music, they have a really hard job, and they have huge goals to meet all the time. And what they need is certainty. We could have the most amazing hour-long commission premiere from Gabriela, Lena, Frank, based on poetry by Yosimar, Reyes, with narration by Prudence, McDaniel, and it's going to be like the greatest bomb to ever hit Detroit. And the opener is Bolero. And guess what's going to be in the thing that gets sent out the season before to get people to buy tickets? Ravel's Bolero. Because people will buy tickets because they know what it is. So it doesn't even have to be insulting like in the title itself. It's simply the game that is played to sustain the whole thing, and we fall prey to that all the time. And so it's this ongoing deeper conversation of how do we find better ways to tell stories and show just a deeper appreciation for creativity and not just reliability. And that's where like a business model can be in direct conflict with like artistic goals and things that are really important for us as humans, that so many of the business realities get in the way of what we need as humans. So as artists, we need to fight against that with the content we're creating, that we're choosing. And as administrators or funders, whatever else we are in the processes that we're going through, and what we emphasize over and over and over again, we need to think about what are we creating an expectation for? Are we training people to expect Ravel's Bolero every other year? Or are we training people to expect next year's most amazing premiere? And that's a long game. So it goes right back to the deep work that you need to do across an organization or as an individual. You need to really think about what are the priorities on all levels.
I think at this point we need to open it up for conversation. Again, Caen has done a segue for us because he's asking about the attendees here and what their interests are and where they're at. So I think it's a great way to open up now for audience comments and questions in the chat. Have anything, just go ahead and feel free to type it in.
Okay, while we're waiting for attendees to post questions, I just want to say that I am inspired by all of you for your powerful ability to tell the story. I consider all of you like the supreme storytellers, right? Whether it is writing poetry or beautiful music or creating programs or coaching people, you are all trying to really transform the lives of others and your own life based on joy and based on how do we contribute to really tell our stories, the ones that come from the past, and how we create our stories looking into the future. And I think that it is so powerful, and I thank you for your contributions, for sharing your wisdom and your spirit, and bringing to us this notion that we have power, that we have an agency, and we can use our talents to really move the needle and to make improvements for everyone living on Earth, right? So I was really inspired by what you said today. Thank you.
So we just got a question in the chat. I don't know if y'all are able to see it. I'll go ahead and read it for you. How do you thank you all? This is London. How do you thank you all for speaking today? It was so nice to meet you all. I'm hoping to prepare a lightning talk presentation, which is part of our broader Race Talks series. I'm working on brainstorming a graphic to express diversity, equality, and inclusion. Do you have any feedback while creating?
Prudence, you probably have slides of a few of those common, like, kind of cartoon graphics. There's like the kids watching the baseball game. There's the fence, the no fence, that kind of stuff. Do you want to mention some of those? And maybe we can get further. We can get more creative. I don't know.
Yeah, it depends on what your vision is that you're trying to convey. There are a lot of, I don't know if you have gone to any of the free photo stock type of websites where you can tap into the already existing graphics and photos that have been taken by photographers from around the world of live events. Some of them, if you just give credit, you can use those for free. Some of them you need to create a subscription. But I would say that if you are looking to really do a graphic for diversity, equity, and inclusion, that you probably want to think about what it is you want to say first and start there. And then find the photos that really represent what your message is.
I'll say of the graphics that are out there, I'd love to like hear what other people have seen, but one that I haven't seen a graphic for, but that I've heard discussed is like the party analogy, where diversity is inviting a bunch of different people to your party. Equity is letting them decide what music is played, and inclusion is dancing with them and do whatever dance they want to do. That's like one analogy that I've heard, but I haven't seen a graphic for it, and I think that would actually be a fun one. I've seen the graphic over and over time of kids watching a baseball game, and they're standing on a hill, and some people are higher up on the hill and can see over the fence, and some can't, and then some have no chance. And so, there's things like that. Or there's one where there's a fence in front of them, and one diverse, I can't even remember how it works, but one of the versions is you help them see over the fence, but the best solution is you remove the fence. I like that one because it just talks about disrupting the current model completely.
Yes.
While we wait for other questions, please don't be shy, audience. Come on in. But I might throw one out while we wait for others. I'm wondering what we can do when mentors are not available in our community or in our work settings. How can we go about bringing those voices and people to a table and making sure that it's not just us showing up with a program we think they're going to like too. Like, how do we actually engage and seek those transformational experiences?
Well,
When
Go ahead.
okay, I was just going to say quickly that when I was in school, I never had the opportunity to study with a woman composer or a composer of color. They were all cisgender, heterosexual white men, and some were not that great, and others were transcendent. They were just so good, and were the ones that encouraged me to start traveling in South America, and to bring back my findings so that they could learn too. I mean, that was amazing, um, and transformative, because it made me think of myself as, I think it's very moving when there's a young white man that looks at a middle-aged Latino woman as a mentor. And to me, that's very healthy, and that's a sign of progress that we can do that. So I remember I would always kind of quietly walk away from the people that were anointed as teachers of mine, and kind of survive. Sometimes, I mean, I did some things like, I had one teacher, for instance, who I never trash talked or was very confrontational. I would just get super, super quiet. That was my style. I would just get really, really small, try not to move. And I would show up with my lessons and write the kind of music they thought that I needed to write. But then I was moonlighting and writing the music that I wanted to write. And then that was the direction that I went through. And I found other protectors. I did things. I was very active as a pianist. So I found a lot of these powerful performance teachers that really believed in me. So then when I stopped pretending, I stopped writing the music I didn't really want to write, I had some allies. It took years just to navigate this conservatory system, and I was really, really strategic in that way. I found women of color through reading, to be honest. The first one that I found was a woman that's become a really good friend of mine, Soyla Mendoza Walker. She's a professor of Peruvian dance at UC Davis. And she wrote this book that was like reading a novel. It was an ethnomusicology manual of Peruvian dance, but the way she wrote it was so personal and so naturally informed by her gender. I remember one chapter where she was saying that she sometimes got respect because she was a woman that knew technology. She had recording equipment, and she could see how little things like that in her trips were helping her. And I had that experience. So just on a human level, I was finding writers. And then I felt like I was meeting Elvis Presley when I finally asked her out for coffee. I had moved back to the Bay Area, and I made her real, and we got together now, and I've gone to Peru with her. So it was through these kinds of strategies. Often remotely, mentors can be people you never meet, to be honest. And even if you're some quasi fictionalizing who they really are, that's okay. I think that's okay. You're creating an idealized community, and of course you want that to be real, and I was able to realize that later. At my academy for my alums, I created one of our commissioning programs called CREA, which in Spanish is the command form for believe. And it's an accidental acronym because I just wanted to create a group called Composers for Racial Equality in the Arts. Nothing fancy, very simple. And I remember going, okay, Composers for Racial Equality Arts, what does it spell out? Oh my God, I have to do it. It spells out CREA. I mean, that's like a sign from the gods. And what it does, it gives my composers of color a mentor of color, not me, but somebody else established in the field, like about my level, that works with them for a whole year. And then it comes with a commission. So they write a piece of music that we hire performers for, and we pay our composers. This is a job. It's for them to really embrace. And for many of them, this is, they're 30 years younger than me. For many of them, it's the first time still that they work with a person of color. So this is a work in progress, finding an abundance of mentors with shared experiences. But you sometimes have to make do with what's around you, and they may become real people, and the pool can grow over time.
Well, thank you so much. We are running up at the end of our time. I wish we could keep chatting, but we only have so much time. And I know Yosimar has to go grace another meeting with his presence as well. And so I think at this time, we'll have to just say once again how amazing it has been to talk with all of you and to hear your amazing stories and all of the amazing work. It's been extremely inspiring. And thank you all again for your participation. This has just been wonderful. Thank you for everyone for attending. And it's just been a blessing to have all of you here. So thank you so much. And thanks for Mariana to getting all this together and having us meet in all of this. So thank you again. This has been fantastic.
Thank you all. Thanks, Corey. And it was great to see you and chat with you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful day, everybody.
Adios.
Take care. Be brave. Stay safe.